finally finished The Picture of Dorian Gray. Every time I want to say The Portrait of Dorian Gray, but it's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Gray spelled in the American fashion, by Oscar Wilde. I believe this is his only published novel, and it is an absolute delight to read. His writing is so witty. I guess he was a very witty person in real life, but just the wit and the humor and the riposte between different characters just roll off the page, and just even the very start of it, there's the way he subverts expectations in the course of a sentence. You start a sentence thinking it's going one way, and then he flips it around and takes it the other way in a very comedic and witty manner. It's just a delight to read. So yeah, it's a 140-year-old book, but it's very easy to read and very enjoyable. So it follows the story of the titular character Dorian Gray and his sort of descent into hedonism and depravity and all that good stuff. It's sort of the classic, the double life of an aristocratic young man, where he presents a face, but behind the scenes he's very much a different person. So the story starts, I've got notes this time, with the painter Basil Hallward, who paints this picture of Dorian Gray. And Basil's friend, Lord Henry, is there, and Henry sees this painting and he's like, "Wow, Basil, this is great, it's fantastic. Who is this poor person you painted?" And through that he gets introduced to Dorian Gray, who he quickly becomes enamored with. Now, I read very much into this, a sort of, not autobiographical account, but I read into it maybe because I know a bit about Oscar Wilde, but I read Dorian Gray maybe as as the picture of youth, as the perfect beauty, as something Oscar Wilde would like to be, but more so that he would like to be with and possess. And I think to me, it's Lord Henry that takes the place of Oscar Wilde in this novel, even though Henry's sort of the antagonist of the novel in a way. And I don't think Oscar Wilde would see himself as someone such as Henry. But I just reading it, like, Henry sees this beautiful young man, becomes totally enamored with him, and immediately starts to try and influence him. And he does so by giving him a lecture, a few paragraphs on influencing, and how you should never be influenced by someone, and how being influenced is horrible, and you should sort of make up your own mind about things. And he's saying this while totally influencing Dorian Gray. And Henry's speech, along with Dorian seeing this painting of himself finished, he sort of comes to realize how valuable his youth and his beauty are. Something he hadn't realized before, and I think it's something a lot of people in sort of their early 20s and their late teens, they don't think of youth. It's something they take for granted, if they even realize they possess it. But at this point, Dorian Gray becomes aware of it, and partly because of what Henry says, he is devastated by the knowledge that this will soon pass. This is ephemeral. One day he's not going to have his looks, not going to have his youth. And so he cries out and he prays that if only it were the painting that would age and decay, while I would remain eternal instead. And of course, throughout the course of this book, we find that this is the case. This actually happens. His wish comes true. The painting takes on his age and his degeneracy, but not just his physical age, his sort of moral, his morality. So whenever he does something wrong or immoral, Wilde presents it that usually this sort of thing would depict on the person's face, the perpetrator's face. Their face would become more ragged and shallow, and you could see sort of their inward degeneration in their outward appearance. But in the case of Dorian, he does remain eternal, and his face never changes. His youth never leaves him. And so it's this painting that instead ages, and not only ages, but as Dorian takes the path of sort of immorality and degeneracy and whatever, the painting depicts that as well. And so Henry sort of takes Dorian under his wing and sort of teaches him or shows him that sort of the only purpose to life is pleasure, is sensation. That's the only true goal, sort of thing. Now I'm probably very much simplifying this, and this is only what I took out of it, but just to get through a quick video. So Dorian sort of sets on that path of taking sort of what he wants, not worrying about consequences, because they won't really affect him. They'll only affect the painting. So that's sort of the first arc, the setup, the initial setup. Then it's revealed Dorian's fallen in love with this actor, this actress, this very young woman who acts in Shakespeare in a very rundown, lower class, sort of not upper class for sure, theater. And he's fallen in love with this girl, and he's sort of, it comes out that he's proposed to this girl, but it's sort of a weird, like, he didn't literally propose to her, but it's sort of, he's like, well, yeah, I basically proposed to her, we're gonna get married now, whatever, to this girl. And so he says, well, Henry, Basil, you guys gotta meet this girl, we're gonna get married, so come down to the theater and I'll show you. And during this performance, she's like, I don't need to work in this theater anymore. I have my Prince Charming Dorian Gray, who's going to, this like rich young nobleman who's going to sweep me off my feet, take me away. So she sort of throws the performance. She performs abysmally as sort of a last sort of she does it for fun, like, oh, what are they going to do, fire me? Like, I'm out of here anyways. But Dorian and his friends see this and are utterly shocked and dismayed and disgusted. They're like, she can't act, what are you talking about, this is awful. And he's like, well, she used to, I don't know what she's doing. And Dorian and Sybil meet after the play, and Sybil's like, oh, wasn't that great fun? Oh, I just like totally threw it away because acting has no meaning. The real meaning of life is love and you and whatever. And he's like, no, that was disgusting, it was horrible. I realized that you're not what I want, and I don't want anything to do with you, and leave me alone. And so he just totally dumps her for and then later she commits suicide, and Dorian finds this out and is utterly distraught. And sort of a side note that's very important, her brother has never met Dorian Gray, but has heard of this Prince Charming that his sister has fallen in love with. And so when she dies, the brother sort of swears vengeance that he will one day get this Prince Charming that he doesn't realize is Dorian Gray. That's sort of a little seed that's planted that will pay off much later in the novel. So Dorian's distraught about Sybil's death for a very brief period of time. Well, first he doesn't even realize it until Henry comes and tells him, and then he's distraught. Then Henry convinces him that, he's like, so what, it happens. Like, she was nothing to you. She wasn't even a good actor. Like, you've got so much life left to live. Come on, let's go have fun. And he just immediately sobers up and is fine from that. But this is when he first notices the first sort of wrinkles and sort of first changes to the painting. And so he's shocked, he's dismayed, he hides the painting from anyone. When anyone asks to see it, he refuses to let them see it. He has it moved upstairs into a room that he blocks off and only he has the keys for. And yeah, make sure no one ever sees it. So then we have sort of a time skip, and we get sort of it's sort of an 18-year time skip, I think, because Dorian Gray's 38 at this point, but he still looks the exact same as he did when he was 20. And no one seems to be shocked by this. They're just like, oh, Dorian, wow, you always look so good. And because he looks so good and so fresh and so youthful and pure and innocent that no one believes all these rumors that are floating about him. Because we find out that over the course of these 18 years, he has fallen further and further into immorality, into degeneracy, and into drugs, and into all sorts of stuff they never outright say in the novel, but sort of you can guess at. And one of the things is all the people that Dorian associates with all sort of come to ruin in one way or another. And so that's how these rumors sort of start. That Dorian's sort of a bad egg, like stay away from him. But anyone who sees him and meets him in person is like, oh, well, these rumors can't be true. I mean, look at this guy. He's like a beautiful, pure, young cherub. But of course, all these rumors are true, and Dorian is sort of falling further and further into the despondency. Anyways, and he at this time he's sort of, not frequently, but once in a while he'll go up and look at the painting and sort of see how horrible and ugly and old and evil it looks, and sort of gloat and take joy in the fact that that is his soul depicted there, but his outward appearance is perfect and eternal and pure. So yeah, Dorian's is just not a very nice guy. So at one point Basil visits, and they sort of had a falling apart. They're not friends like they used to be years and years ago, but Basil's like, there's all these rumors going on about you, and I can't believe them. I mean, look at you, Dorian. I can't believe they're true, but what if they are? And is this conversation, and eventually Dorian's like, fine, look, you want to know the truth? I'll show you the truth. Remember that painting you did? Come on upstairs, I'll show you the painting. He shows him the painting, and Basil's horrified, naturally. Basil's the only person who ever actually sees the painting besides Dorian after this sort of magical spell's been cast on it or whatever. So Basil cries out, and he's utterly disgusted and can't believe that, and I guess this was all true, all these things they said about you, Dorian. And then Dorian sort of gets into a fit, and there's a knife nearby, takes the knife and stabs Basil to death, killing Basil. So he's now a murderer, among other things, although he might have been a murderer before, or like not first degree murder, but like he might have been responsible for some deaths before. But anyways, Sybil's is the one. So now he's got this body to deal with, and he blackmails another friend somehow. It doesn't say what exactly he has on him, but he manages to blackmail this guy to dispose of the body. This guy's an alchemist, a scientist of some sort, and so he uses alchemical solutions to dispose of the body in a very 1890s sci-fi way. Anyway, so he gets rid of the body, and then he's like, okay, great, I'm safe. There's no trace. Basil was supposed to be on a train heading to France that evening, so there's no way they can trace it back to him. And indeed, throughout this entire book, it's never traced back to him. Even though at one point Henry's talking about, oh, people who are criminals are so much more interesting than the rest of us. I wish I could have met a murderer. And Dorian explains to him, hey, what if I killed Basil? What would you think of that? And he's like, there's no way you killed Basil. So even when he admits it to someone, they don't believe him. So anyways, he gets rid of the body, but he's feeling a sort of guilt, or he just needs to clear his mind. And so how do you clear your mind when you're a wealthy aristocrat in the 1890s in Britain? You go to an opium den. So he goes to an opium den. Doesn't ever actually show him doing opium. Like, all these horrible things are just hinted at. The opium den's probably the most on the nose, but it doesn't actually say that he partook. Anyways, while he's there, there's this rough-looking sailor who turns out to be Sybil Vane's brother, James Vane, the one who had sworn revenge. And one of the other patrons, one of the women at this establishment, refers to Dorian as Prince Charming, which sort of sets off James. He tracks Dorian down as he leaves and goes to kill him. He's like, I finally caught up with you after 18 years. You killed my sister, or you caused my sister's death, or whatever. And Dorian says, what are you talking about? 18 years? Look at my face. Like, lift the light up to my face. So James does, and sees the face of a 20-year-old. And he's like, you think I killed your sister 18 years ago? What are you talking about? And James is like, whoa, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I thought you were this guy I've been chasing this whole time. So he lets Dorian go, but only after James goes back to the bar, and the woman's like, "Yeah, no, that guy's totally old. Yeah, he's looked really young forever, but he's definitely a lot older." And James is like, "Wait, he was the guy. I let him get away." So that sort of starts a sort of an arc of Dorian being very paranoid that James is coming after him. At one point, he's at a sort of a dinner party, and he sees out the window James Vane there looking in at him, and Dorian sort of passes out, and he becomes increasingly paranoid. Um, and then, so it's sort of leading up. So I'm thinking, okay, we're getting to the point where Dorian's past is going to catch up with him, and his initial sin is going to be the one that finally is the nail in his coffin, so to speak. But in a sort of a very interesting twist, they're on a hunting party, and they're out hunting, and one of the guys that Dorian's hunting with sees a rabbit, and he goes to shoot the rabbit, and Dorian says, "No, don't shoot the rabbit. It's like, it looks very beautiful and pure, and I don't want you to kill it." And the guy's like, "What are you talking about? I'm gonna shoot this thing." The rabbit jumps into the bush. Guy swings the gun over, fires into the bush, and you hear a man cry out. So it turns out he killed someone. He thinks it's one of the spotters or one of the people who was trying to flush out game. And he's like, "Why would they get in front of the guns?" And it's sort of not a tragedy, because this person's sort of a no one, sort of a lower class servant person. So they're like, "Oh, well, it's an accident. Accidents happen. Oh, it's a shame, but we mustn't think about it." So Dorian's kind of upset about it, because he's like, "Ooh, like, what the heck? Someone just died." And anyway, later that day, when he's alone, someone comes in, one of Dorian's servants, and he's like, "Oh, is this about the death? Okay, I'll write a check. What is it? How much does the family need to get by?" Like, he's sort of writing off this person's life, and the person's like, "Well, actually, the person who got killed didn't work for us. It was some sort of a sailor." And then Dorian's like, "Wait, what?" Rushes to get to the body, finds out it was James Vane that was killed. James Vane was hiding in wait to kill Dorian, and by a fluke chance that Dorian himself even tried to prevent unintentionally, James Vane is killed. And so Dorian is utterly elated. He feels so safe. His paranoia is gone. The man who's trying to kill him has been killed. And so that's sort of the twist, which I thought was very interesting, especially in a book of this age. I don't expect twists like this, but maybe I'm not as well read in 19th century literature or anything previous to know that twists like that, I guess, have always been a thing. So Dorian's safe, but he still feels this lingering sense of guilt, and sort of looking back at his life and looking at the painting that has now blood on the hands of this grotesque, cadaverous figure that is a true reflection of the soul inside Dorian. So he decides he's going to turn his life around. So he's been sort of playing with this little farm girl out in the middle of nowhere. So he finally breaks it off with her. He's like, "No, I'm done. I'm actually a nobleman. I'm like way too old for you, whatever." And he's like, "Look, I did a good deed. I turned this girl down, etc." And he tells this to Henry. He's like, "Henry, I'm turning my life around. I'm going to be a good guy from now on." And Henry takes all that and sort of twists it around, and how says like, "Oh, sure, you think you did this for her, but you really did it for you, and you really didn't even help her, because now she's never going to be able to find true love, because sure, one true love was you, and you left her, and now she's going to be stuck with some village bumpkin who's going to treat her poorly, and she's always going to think about you, and she's just going to have a miserable life, blah, 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 blah." And so then Henry leaves, and Dorian's just distraught again, and sort of feels the sense of guilt. So he goes up to the painting, and he sees in the painting all his past sins and all the horribleness of his life. And it's not that he regrets everything he did, it's he despises the guilt that makes him feel. And so he wants to get rid of the evidence of this guilt, and he thinks, "Oh, I'll just destroy the painting, and with that last piece of evidence, I'll be free of any sense of guilt." So he takes the knife that's still there from when he killed Basil, and stabs the painting. And as he stabs the painting, there's a cry, a loud cry, and some people nearby hear it. They look up, they try and figure out, and eventually some of the servants go down from the roof onto the balcony into this room, and in there they find the painting stabbed but looking exactly as it did when Basil painted it, totally unchanged. And on the floor is a corpse stabbed through in the heart with a knife. And at first they're like, who is this corpse, this horrible, cadaverous, decrepit old man? And it's until they notice the clothes and the rings and stuff on him that they realize, wait, this is Dorian. And that's how it ends. So at first I thought he wasn't going to die in the end, and like there wasn't really going to be a moral to the story sort of thing, but he did die, and in destroying the painting he sort of reversed the spell, and all old age and everything crept up with him, but in stabbing it he also stabbed himself and died. So that's the plot, but it was a very enjoyable read, very short, very sweet. I think Oscar Wilde's a brilliant writer. But yeah, there was definitely some stuff I read into it that I'm like, this is, maybe it's too much to say that it's Wilde's fantasy, but like I just read more Henry as Wilde, and sort of Dorian as sort of the perfect youth that Dorian would love to take on, and or that Wilde would love to sort of take on, and maybe not corrupt like Henry does in the book. Maybe I'm being very unfair to Wilde, but yeah, and or maybe Wilde sees himself more as Basil, because it's not explicitly stated, but it's pretty clear that Basil was in love with Dorian from the beginning. But anyways, yeah, so that was The Picture, not the portrait, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And I very much enjoyed it. Very fun, very different read. I don't usually read sort of classical literature. Classical? See, when I think classical, I think of Greece and Rome, but it is a classic. So, yes, it was good.